Bonjour, je suis Vanda Vitali, directrice générale de l'Association des musées canadiens, l'AMC. Welcome to the Canadian Museums Association's first ever virtual conference. As the CEO of the CMA, I have a privilege of being at the helm of the CMA and the challenge of taking us forward. The CMA acknowledges that its secretariat, located in Ottawa, is on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live and learn on this territory with mutual respect and gratitude. The CMA also acknowledges that as a national association, its work relates to other First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and urban Indigenous people. We are committed to demonstrate respect for these groups and to promote the importance of their cultural contributions to history and today. Personally, as a recent resident of Ottawa, only since past October, I endeavor to learn more about the people and traditions of those who historically cared and continue to care for the land that I now reside on. Nous ne sommes pas à Montréal comme prévu. Nous sommes partout au Canada, mais nous sommes en esprit avec les Montréalais et avec Montréal. We all know that current pandemic is far-reaching. The situation is serious. But there is always a silver lining. Like many organizations, we have been propelled into new and more modern ways of doing things. And so we are happy to convene this event online. Here are some of the highlights of the past year and indication of what to expect as we go forward. Au cours des premiers mois suivant mon entrée en fonction, j'étais en mode d'écoute, connecting with stakeholders, listening discussions, meetings and surveys, planning the strategic planning process, which is now underway, gathering your ideas. J'ai pris note de vos idées et je continuerai de le faire. At the CMA, we see ourselves as a node in the network of institutions, establishing discussions and collaboration with various sister institutions and partners who were of utmost importance to us in the past several months, and they continue to be so. A couple of the collaborative ventures are illustrated in the programming today, with our provincial and territorial colleagues and with other heritage and cultural organizations. Nous sommes déterminés d'établir des partenariats plus vastes. Ils sont importants, ils sont essentiels, surtout en ces temps difficiles. À l'avenir, l'AMC renforcera encore sa capacité en modernisant ses outils et ses pratiques de travail et en continuant de s'assurer sa pertinence à l'échelle nationale et internationale. Je vous entends. Nous allons renforcer nos capacités et améliorer nos services, notamment nos congrès. I'm hearing you, and we are making adjustments based on your feedback. We are improving our services. We are modernizing our way of doing, including our conferences. Our new look and feel and our new website are symptomatic of some of the changes you suggested and you can expect to see in the future. You can also expect us to continue to advocate strongly and in unison with our partners in advance the concerns of Canadian museums. With one voice, we know we are stronger. Nous sommes plus forts quand nous nous exprimons d'une seule voix. Nous le savons, et c'est grâce à vous et pour vous que nous existons. Pour le secteur d'aujourd'hui et pour sa viabilité à l'avenir. We have an exciting agenda for you today. We will hear from Professor Jack Lohman, President of the Board of Directors of the CMA. We will also be joined by the Honourable Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of Canadian Heritage, who will share updates from the government and engage in a dialogue with our provincial and territorial colleagues. We will also have a panel discussion with heritage and other cultural organizations where we will discuss our common challenges and explore ways to work together. Lastly, today, we will hold the CMA's annual general meeting virtually. And yes, I'm sorry, this part is open to CMA members only. You will have registered and received your login credentials for this segment. So thank you for joining us. I know the situation we are currently in is unprecedented and presents innumerable challenges to the museum sector. And we are so proud to represent you. Là encore une fois, je vous remercie de votre participation à notre congrès virtuel. L'AMC est fière de vous représenter. Merci. I trust you will find today's programming interesting and useful to you. Expect more online content from the CMA in the future. Maintenant, j'invite le président du conseil d'administration de l'AMC, le professeur Jack Lohman, à prendre la parole. Jack.
Merci, Vanda. Hello, I'm Jack Lohman. Je m'appelle Jack Lohman. I'm the CEO of the Royal British Columbia Museum, and I also have the privilege of being the president of the board of directors of the Canadian Museums Association, the CMA. J'ai aussi le privilège de présider le conseil d'administration de l'AMC. I'm speaking to you from Victoria, British Columbia, on the traditional territory of the Songhees and the Esquimalt people. I'm glad that despite these incredibly difficult times, and despite the fact that we've had to put off our national conference to November as a result of the pandemic, that we have found a way to gather together virtually to discuss issues of mutual concern. I'd like to begin my remarks by saying a few words about the response to COVID-19. The government has much on its plate to address the challenges Canadians and industries are currently facing. We all sincerely appreciate the federal and essential services response to date. Healthcare workers, civil servants, the scientific community, community-facing charities, those working in care, education, transport, food distribution and supply, and many other essential services have responded with grit and alacrity, and we're deeply in their debt. I want to signal my appreciation towards the CMA as the national association representing and federating Canada's museum sector for the work it's been doing to advocate on behalf of the sector and the provincial and territorial museums associations that are collaborating along with the CMA on these initiatives. The entire museum sector should also be congratulated for its response. All provinces and territories have seen a proliferation of community-led museum support initiatives, organized at the very local level. Initiatives such as collecting masks from museums, gloves from archives, 3D printing visors for the health sector, keeping children occupied online. These initiatives are where our sector is directly enabling the health sector. This is key to catalyzing changes in behavior that will need to be maintained longer term, including ensuring that physical distancing does not mean social isolation. The coronavirus pandemic has shown all too clearly how interconnected and interdependent we are as a sector. As an example, take the importance of science in guiding decision-making in this emergency. Our response is being led by science, and the importance of museum-led research has never been so significant. Or take the importance of natural history collections in identifying the outcome of the biological interface between species and humans. This pandemic has shaken the whole world to its core. Rarely, if ever, has humankind found itself so adrift in the same boat, so to speak, in the midst of a devastating storm so destructive to the well-being of nations and individuals, families, and communities, the systems and institutions which we have created, upon which we depend to hold us together, are being tested, rocked, exposed, and even destroyed. Whatever the outcome, we know this to be true. We will not and cannot carry on as before, because we will all have been changed by this singular event. Our museums here and everywhere are not exempt. As museums, we will need to, indeed, we are forced to, reflect upon the impact of the pandemic on our own institutional life and role. Museums traditionally use objects to support the stories we tell. We take, as far as it is possible to do so, an objective position to be trusted tellers of truth about the past. But when we ourselves are profoundly part of that story that we tell, we become subjective as involved and affected subjects. This shift may be seen by some as dangerous, but I would encourage us all to see it as vital to our future role and place in the world if we are to be trusted tellers of this truth. As participants in the stories we will tell about this historic and universal event, the value of our offering will go beyond being a reliable authoritative source. Our ability to educate and to influence through the narratives we create in our exhibitions and our programming will be grounded in the recognition by our public that our empathy is real and founded in a shared experience. The power of the empathetic museum will be in the recognition of this shared experience, our participation as fellow subjects of this historic moment. This will challenge us to think more about how we create greater empathy building, immersive, visceral activities, how we develop greater connection with communities in curating those things that they care about and are vital to their well-being. As I stated earlier, the pandemic has clearly revealed our interconnectedness and interdependence as a sector. It also reveals the same about our relationship with the people and the communities we serve. The coronavirus is also shining a blinding light on our systematic sector deficiencies across Canada. We have not been able to respond to enough pace and scale. Museums have shut. Auxiliary, temporary, and freelance workers have lost their jobs. We do not have a clear picture of what collections might be threatened or impacted. There are also deficiencies of joined-up thinking, of data and mapping, of networks, and they all signal a direction and an opportunity for our future work and focus. Large legacy institutions like national museums are responding through the only systems they know, systems of governance, economy and finance, technology, public services and civil society. But they've been shown to be too weak to support a national museum crisis. The result has been the emergence of what I would call a solidarity deficit, in which these versions of what has gone wrong fight it out in a discourse that is polarized and visceral. In revealing the weakness of the present, this pandemic has already pointed to a need for a bridge to a new future. As we contemplate our future, there are three things that I believe must drive the community forward. First, greater solidarity. We urgently need to think beyond specific interventions, but look towards the whole museum system in Canada. A whole system perspective is needed to understand how best to calibrate our work. Forging a national museum strategy is an essential building block now more than ever. This means an ongoing assessment of work across museums, making changes to their delivery where gaps are identified, as well as the continual review of the wider system effects, such as how can museums be supported to be more resilient, especially when faced with knock-on impacts such as, well, a loss of expertise, for example, a loss of curatorial support, a breakdown of key services, or even a disruption by suppliers. 2, greater connectedness. Let's consider a move away from a highly structured program towards a deep commitment to help each other, to greater flexibility. Consider the determination to improve outcomes and share data, and work towards an outcome-based results system, a system of national standards for museums, standards around things like sound financial management or the security of collections. And finally, greater social responsibility, emphasizing the collective power and the social justice power of the work we do. This is a vision and a version of a joined-up sector that does not simply emphasize nationhood, identity, and tradition, but also supports communities, indigenous diversity and knowledge, social cohesion, science, understanding climate change, and learning. Dear colleagues, mes chers collègues, what we do in this crisis response will have repercussions, direct and indirect, for years and decades to come. Les mesures que nous prenons pour faire face à cette crise auront des répercussions directes et indirectes pendant des années, voire des décennies. Changes in museum practice are by their nature still hard to predict and plan for, but their emergence will need to be anticipated and incorporated into dynamic learning processes for our entire sector. The future needs a stronger museums network that involves the CMA working with the nationals and with the PTMAs and with the GLAM sector and with the heritage sector to help us think beyond the shadow of the pandemic to the kind of world we want to forge together. In the world beyond this pandemic, we have to allow ourselves license to revision our purpose, our role, and practices as museums, in the same way as every other human establishment will need to and must do. The strength or fragility of all our institutions are equal only to the vision, the passion, and the energy of those who create or maintain them, and the value and trust placed in them by those for whom they exist. The CMA is best placed, given its role, to bring the sector together, to offer strong leadership, to encourage transparency about all our efforts. Let us embrace learning from both our successful and our failed efforts to maximize societal benefits that museums can and must bring together. Thank you so much for listening to my words. Et maintenant, j'ai le grand plaisir de vous présenter l'Honorable Stephen Guilbeault, ministre du patrimoine canadien. Comme vous le savez tous, Monsieur Guilbeault a été nommé ministre à la suite de la dernière élection fédérale. Since the last election, he's been taking the time to connect with and to get to know the museum community across Canada. And I appreciate, for example, his recent visit to British Columbia. As well as being an accomplished author, we know the minister has a background in environmentalism and in activism, and Canada's museum can certainly benefit from a heritage minister who has experienced actively championing important issues like ours. We're delighted Minister Guilbeault has taken the time to join us today. It's so important for the museum community to hear from the government, especially during this very challenging time. Minister Guilbeault will deliver his remarks. He will then participate in a dynamic roundtable discussion on key issues. Minister Guilbeault, welcome, and over to you. À vous la parole.
Thank you, Jack, for the kind introduction. J'avais bien hâte de participer au congrès de l'Association des musées canadiens à Montréal mais hélas, la situation actuelle nous a obligés à changer les plans. Donc, je vous parle depuis mon bureau à Gatineau, au Québec, sur le territoire traditionnel des Algonquins. At times like these, it's more important than ever for us to stay connected, even while we keep our distance physically for the sake of our own health and the health of other Canadians. I want to thank the Canadian Museum Association and the provincial and territorial museum associations for bringing us together today. I know calling off the conference was a tough decision for you. Despite that major setback, you've been incredibly resourceful in order to make this virtual meeting possible. I would also like to thank all the people in the museum community for supporting physical distancing measures since the start of the crisis. Au gouvernement, nous sommes conscients qu'en fermant vos salles d'exposition, vous faites un énorme sacrifice pour assurer la santé et la sécurité des Canadiennes et des Canadiens. Comme vous, je suis très préoccupé par les effets dévastateurs de la situation actuelle. J'en ai discuté avec Vanda et je sais que l'insécurité temporaire et les pertes de revenus sont une grande source de préoccupation pour vous tous et toutes, surtout à l'approche de la haute saison touristique. Je comprends aussi la responsabilité que vous avez envers vos employés, que ce soit vos professionnels ou vos travailleurs occasionnels comme les étudiants. I want you to know that our government is doing everything it can to be there for you. We've responded quickly, knowing that the needs to make ends meet are urgent. We've introduced a Canada Emergency Response Benefit to help people who have lost work, including contract and self-employed workers. We've introduced a Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy to help businesses and non-for-profit organizations to keep their staff on the payroll. And we've continued to provide funding to museums. As we speak, my team at Canadian Heritage is still processing funding requests for the Museum's Assistance Program. Even for situations where an exhibition has been canceled or postponed, I've asked my department to be as flexible as possible with how you can use your funding. Please contact your program officer. They're here to work through these issues with you. I've also approved a multi-year funding for the Young Canada Works in Heritage program. I know it will be a while before museums will be running at full capacity again, so we will endeavor to be as flexible as possible on how you can use this funding. That could mean giving employers the ability to extend the project into the fall and winter, or giving students the option to work remotely or on a part-time basis. Finally, we're working on other measures specific to the cultural sector. I hope to be able to announce them soon. Les musées jouent un grand rôle dans la vie des Canadiennes et des Canadiens. Ils éclairent le passé et le présent pour nous aider à mieux comprendre où nous allons. En ce moment, nous voyons à quel point l'accès aux collections numériques est important. En cette période d'incertitude, les musées continuent à nous donner des repères stables grâce aux expositions en ligne. Ce savoir-faire que vous développez sera précieux pour préparer l'après-pandémie. Access to digital collections for all Canadians is an important part of the National Museum's policy review. It is one of the mandates given to me by the Prime Minister. I know that you have high expectations for the new museum policy. That's why we want to make sure it's done right. You have my commitment that we will resume this work once this crisis has passed. L'élaboration d'un cadre pour le rapatriement des biens culturels et des restes ancestraux autochtones, ainsi que la sensibilisation au changement climatique me tiennent grandement à cœur. Ce sont deux autres éléments de ma lettre de mandat et ils restent à l'ordre du jour. Votre collaboration sera précieuse car les musées ont un rôle important à jouer pour avancer la réconciliation avec les peuples autochtones et donner leur juste sur les changements climatiques. Our discussions today will give me food for thought on the national policy review. And most importantly, they will help our government better support you in these difficult times. I stand with you, and we will do all we can to come out of this even stronger than before. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for being with us today. Your reassuring words mean a lot to us. As you know, these are hard times, and being able to speak to you, we know that you will hear us, and we know how important it is for all of us to be in a dialogue with you. So for all the museums across the country who are following us today, thank you very much for taking the time. We know that is a very precious element today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I would like now to introduce the other participants of this roundtable. We have Megan Patterson from Alberta Museum Association. We have Ryan Hunt, British Columbia, Leanne Maitland from Yukon, Kelly Blue McQuaid from New Brunswick, Monique Brandt from Manitoba, Anita Price from Nova Scotia, Marie Lalonde from Ontario, Joanne Vigneault from Prince Edward Island, Stéphane Chagnon from Quebec, Teresita McCarthy from Newfoundland and Labrador, and Wendy Finch from Saskatchewan. We have about 35 minutes for this roundtable, and as we discussed, this discussion will be around two broad themes. First one is relief measures and adjustments to current funding, and the second one is the National Museum Policy. As I facilitate this discussion, I will ask my colleagues to share their opinions with you, and we are all very, very interested in hearing, Mr. Minister, your thoughts on these topics. So I would like to start with Ryan. Ryan, would you please address our group?
Certainly. So I have a two-part question. To what degree are federal and provincial governments coordinating their efforts and planning to support the sector? And given that the fallout of COVID-19 may last years, what is the government's 3-year plan for relief?
Thank you for the question. I was just last week on the phone with colleagues from the provinces and territories, looking at how we can work together and collaborate together to ensure that we can help as many organizations in the arts and culture sector in Canada. And I've had, in fact, follow-up calls with many colleagues individually, Quebec, Ontario, Yukon territories, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, Alberta, and we'll try and have individual calls with all of my colleagues. Your second question is a really important one, and one, quite honestly, we haven't been able to tackle yet because we're so much still into crisis mode and helping Canadians and organizations and businesses trying to make it through that first phase of the crisis. So we're adjusting some of the measures that we've already announced. I think I can tell you now, the Prime Minister in his daily press briefing has announced or will announce in the coming minutes that royalties and copyrights will not count as wage for the Canadian Emergency Response Program, which we called CERB, which was a concern for many in our sector. And the Prime Minister is announcing that those royalties or copyrights won't be counted as revenues. So we're, as you can see, and frankly, on an ongoing basis, we've announced these big national-wide measures for people or organizations, which we're having to tweak because time is not on our side. We felt we needed to put these measures out the door as quickly as possible, realizing that we would need to adjust them over time because if you cast a very wide net, clearly the criteria of these programs won't necessarily work for everybody. That being said, I think we can start to see in a horizon in a not so distant future where we can start talking about the second phase of what we're going through, which would be a recovery plan. Once we've made it through the worst of the crisis, what does recovery look like? And obviously, recovery will look like something very different in different parts of our society. If you're in the agricultural sector, if you're in the tourism sector, if you're in the arts and culture sector, So what we will be doing, and we will definitely need your help for that second phase of our work in trying to design programs and to come up with measures that will be adapted to your reality. And I think, that recovery phase will be the second of what will probably be a three-pronged approach, where we will have a third phase, which is, okay, well, what does the new normal look like? And I agree with you. I think that in our sector, for some of the activities, we may be years away from something that looks like normal. And maybe there will be a new normal, which we will have to adapt to. But so I don't have the answer to your question, but what I can tell you is that we will continue talking with you and working with you to ensure that what we do is as best adapted as possible to suit your needs.
Thank you, Stephen Guilbeault. I will now turn the microphone to my colleague, Stéphane Chagnon from Quebec. Stéphane.
Thank you, Vanda. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le ministre, d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui. Ma question va être plutôt d'ordre général. Est-ce que Patrimoine canadien entend mettre sur pied des mesures financières spécifiques au secteur muséal pour aider les musées à surmonter la crise de la COVID-19? Et est-ce que, par exemple, les programmes actuels de Patrimoine canadien pourront être bonifiés, par exemple, par des fonds d'urgence pour les expositions itinérantes? Voilà ma question.
D'accord. Merci, Stéphane. Comme je le disais tout à l'heure, ce que nous avons fait jusqu'à maintenant, les mesures que nous avons annoncées étaient des mesures d'ordre très général pour l'ensemble de la société et de l'économie canadienne. Ce que nous avons commencé à faire au cours des derniers jours et le travail que nous allons poursuivre au cours des prochains jours, et je dirais probablement des prochaines quelques semaines, c'est d'annoncer des mesures qui seront plus spécifiques pour différents secteurs. Alors, on a vu au cours des derniers jours, par exemple, des annonces dans le secteur agricole, des annonces pour les organismes sans but lucratif. Et je travaille avec mes collègues ici au ministère du Patrimoine, ainsi qu'avec nos collègues aux finances, au bureau du Premier ministre, pour une série de mesures qui seront spécifiques au secteur des arts et de la culture, et bien sûr pour les musées également. Je ne peux vous en dire plus maintenant parce que ce travail-là se poursuit, n'a pas encore abouti, mais j'ai bon espoir qu'au cours des prochains jours, peut-être une semaine ou deux, mais pas beaucoup plus que ça, je pense que nous serons en mesure d'annoncer ces mesures-là qui seront vraiment spécifiques pour le secteur et qui visent encore une fois à vous aider à passer à travers la crise. Et après ça, on va se rasseoir ensemble pour voir à quoi la relance va ressembler spécifiquement pour les musées, compte tenu du fait qu'il risque d'y avoir encore des différentes mesures de distanciation, par exemple, que nous allons devoir maintenir pendant encore probablement plusieurs mois, jusqu'à ce qu'il y ait une immunité collective, communautaire ou un vaccin qui soit développé. Mais donc, je pense qu'il faut être bien conscient que cette situation-là de distanciation physique va demeurer avec nous pendant plusieurs mois, même quand nous serons passés à travers cette première vague-là de la crise. Alors, nous allons continuer de vous consulter, nous allons continuer de discuter avec vous pour que les mesures qui seront annoncées au cours des prochaines semaines soient les meilleures possibles pour le secteur des musées.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Stéphane. I now like to turn to Leanne Maitland from Yukon. Leanne.
Hello, Minister. I have a couple of questions about existing funding programs, and I want to say it was great to hear that there will be some greater flexibility with the Young Canada Works program this year. And I was wondering if there's an opportunity to have some long-term changes to the program to make it easier to access for more museums, such as lifting restrictions in terms of age and or the status of education. I also had a question about the Museums Assistance Program. It's in need of an update. And are there plans in place to conduct an update and review? If so, what's the projected timeline, and how will the sector be able to provide comments and feedback?
Thank you for the questions. As I said, and one of the first things we did when the pandemic was announced and we had to shut down basically the entire Canadian society, was that we would, at Heritage, we would show the greatest possible amount of flexibility for the programs with the way they're designed right now. We've told organizations with whom we had agreements in the arts and culture sector that we would honor our agreements for the presentation of events, regardless of what type of events these may be. We would honor our agreement even if these events don't take place or are postponed. And we are working with you to see how you can use that money to cope with the impact of the crisis. So we want to do the same thing with the student program. And the other thing we've also announced is that we were going ahead we would try and accelerate the deployment of our existing programs as much as it's possible to do so. We do have some internal limitation in terms of capacity because basically the ministry is, like all the others, are shut down with the exception of essential services. But we are trying to see, we've done it with the Canada Book Fund, the periodical fund. People will be getting their money in the coming weeks as opposed to the normal procedure where they would have gotten the money sometimes next fall. It is very much so my intention to review many of our programs, and certainly everything that has to do with museum, and I've talked about it in my introductory remarks. We need to update the museum's policy. It's very much out of date. It is a priority for me, but unfortunately, that's not something that we can do right now. I mean, just yesterday I was asking whether or not it would be possible for me, because I do have a bit more time on my hands. I mean, I'm busy, but there's only so many phone conference you can do in one day, and so I asked, well, can we start looking at how we could review our programs? And the answer was we can't, because there's people aren't. I mean, we've put everything on hold with the exception of essential services, which are defined for, as far as Heritage is concerned, with getting money out the door, with approving, with going ahead with our programs and approving requests as fast as we can do it. So I'm totally with you on the fact we need to review many of our programs. It will unfortunately have to wait a little while longer, but definitely as far as museums programs are concerned, this is something I would like to do with you and in collaboration with you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, and thank you, Leanne. And now we have Kelly Blue-McQuaid from the New Brunswick. Kelly.
Hello, Minister. As you stated earlier, the Prime Minister said that there will be an announcement soon about specific sector-related relief for those hardest hit by COVID-19. Will funding be made available to support museum operations during this crisis?
Unfortunately, since we're still in discussions with our colleagues at Finance, Prime Minister's office, and we haven't finalized those discussions, I can't go into very specific details in terms of what will or won't be part of this relief package. But we understand that supporting your operations right now is a challenge, and so we're paying very close attention to that as part of our conversations with our colleague at Finance and the Prime Minister's office. I would like to tell you more right now, but unfortunately, I just can't.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I now turn the microphone to Marie Lalonde. Marie.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Ministre. Thank you for joining us today. It's certainly the situation right now is affecting every single museum across the country. And we know, for example, from a survey recently carried out in Ontario that about more than 70% of our museums do not have reserves. beyond a 3-month period. So while we know all museums are affected, the concern is that nonprofit museums, independent not-for-profits, may not survive. And yet, they're central to the recovery. They're central to the community life. And perhaps I would certainly support and echo all the comments and requests of my colleagues to date. But I would also bring to your attention some of the potential ways to help in the recovery, and that is the endowment funds that the Department of Canadian Heritage has. And currently they are not open for the museum and heritage sector, and that would be an immediate way forward. So similarly with programs like Young Canada Works, if there is flexibility with matching funding, such programs, it would be very helpful. So what might be some of the ways to assist in building forward towards recovery?
Well, one of the things we've done is to ensure that the measures that the government has announced would be made available to not-for-profit organizations. The wage subsidy, for example, and many of the other measures that we've announced are available for not-for-profit organizations. So I understand that the wage subsidy in some cases may not be sufficient, but we know that it's helping some organization. In fact, many organizations across the country. We on the endowment fund. It's not the first time I've heard this in the last couple of weeks. It is something we're looking at. As I said, reviewing programs right now is very difficult because of the current situation. There's just the people who work on these programs aren't working right now because it's not considered an essential service. The review of program is not part of our essential services right now. But it is on my list of things to look at when we start getting back to something that will look like a little more normal. And in terms of the Canada Works and Heritage Program, as I said earlier, we are trying to see how we can be as flexible as possible with the application of this program and, frankly, all of the other programs that we have right now in light of the current situation. So what I would encourage you to do, if you have specific needs regarding how that project, that program could be applied in light of your circumstances, contact your program officer and talk with them about this.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you, Stephen. We have a couple of more minutes. If someone else would like to ask something related to this topic. Okay. Let's then move on to the National Museum policy and issues related to that. Wendy, would you kindly start the discussion?
Certainly, Vanda, and thank you, Minister, for taking the time today. It was really good to hear that once this national crisis is over and we're all back in our offices and museums and we again look to be moving the sector forward, that you are committed to undertaking the review of the museum policy as was listed in your ministerial mandate letter. My question is, if you are also committed to making those systemic changes to the Department of Canadian Heritage that will be necessary to put a museum policy for the entire museum sector in Canada in the 21st century into practice, including appropriate funding measures. Thank you.
I'm not sure what you mean by systemic changes in the Department of Heritage, but there's no point in doing revising our museum policy if we're not going to give appropriate resources to the museum sector. What's the point? Now, this may sound like something that's totally obvious. As far as the government is concerned, nothing is obvious. But the first, I would argue, the first phase of getting you the appropriate resources that you need is coming up with a policy that is a policy meaningful in the 21st century, looking at digital access to collection, looking at digitization, looking at a whole range of different things. I think we're going to talk about climate change a little bit later, but that is something that many of you are doing. The Prime Minister has asked me to look specifically at that. The idea there is obviously not to tell you how to do your job, but maybe how can we as a federal government better assist you, and how can we help others that aren't necessarily doing that get on board with this. So to me, these things go hand in hand. We'll work together on this new policy, and we'll have to strike a balance between, because we are in a minority government, and I don't know how long I'll be here, or our government will be here. So we could take a long time to do consultations and come up with a policy which may unfortunately not get adopted, or we can try and be nimble about it, and we can try and do meaningful consultations, but maybe do them fast, and come up quickly with a new policy that we could get adopted in the coming months, or maybe in the next year or so that it is in place. And then, if the government doesn't last so long, at least we will have been able to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your encouraging words, and thank you, Wendy. And I would like now to ask Megan Patterson from Alberta to lead our discussion. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Vanda, and good morning, Minister. Building on Wendy's question around the policy, I'm wondering, in what ways do you see the National Museum Policy as being able to unite museums across the country under a common vision and help them to embrace contemporary issues such as the social and environmental role that museums have started taking on across this country? So that would include everything from our small volunteer-run institutions in rural communities all the way up to our large nationally operated museums.
I totally agree with you. I think these elements should be part of a new museum policy. The one we have is totally outdated. Last time, when it was adopted, internet was barely around. And I think if there's, I think this crisis will be teaching us many lessons, but certainly one of them is that how important the arts and culture sector is, in this time of crisis where people are stuck home with not much to do, how access to what the sector can offer is important, and right now this access is largely done through the internet. And we need to help you, we need to assist you to be able to fully embrace this new reality without necessarily leaving behind the more traditional ways of doing what you've been doing so well for so many years. But I think that technology will play a more important role in the years to come, and I don't think we've been there for you so far to help you embrace this and to adapt to this new reality. Our current plans for broadband access to the internet for all of Canadians is that before the crisis, that our goal was that 100% of Canadians would have access to broadband internet by 2030. I coming out of this crisis, I suspect that this very, very far away time frame will no longer be acceptable to many Canadians. And this is something we're going to have to do much more quickly. Same token, we will need to help you to provide you with the necessary resources to do that, but to embrace new. You've talked about new social and environmental realities, reconciliation with our First Nations and Indigenous communities. It's not something lots of people were talking about in the early 90s. It is a very important priority for our government. It is something important to many Canadians. It is something many of your museums, I've visited many of them in the last 6 months across the country. Many of you are doing so well. And I think we can learn, Canadians can learn from you and maybe learn from each other on that. So I agree. I totally agree with what you said.
Thank you very much, Megan. Anita, would you like to take the floor now?
Thank you, Vanda, and thank you, Minister, for joining us today. We do appreciate it. I guess I'd be interested in hearing more on your thoughts regarding the development of a new museum policy for Canada. I was very encouraged that, in your remarks, you mentioned that you felt it's important that it's a collaborative approach between your department and the museum community. But I'd really be interested in hearing what your thoughts are about engaging Canadians in the renewal of a museum policy as part of our understanding of museums' relevance to Canadian life. We know, every one of us who works in museums, that every time Canadians are surveyed and asked, are museums important to you? It's usually somewhere around the mid to even high 90% rate comes in as museums are terribly important to us. So we know this, but I think this is an opportunity for your department to really learn more about what Canadians are seeking. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that issue.
Well, what I would like us to do is to co-construct this policy together. We did that on the Indigenous Language Act. It was something that really our department, in collaboration with others, we built that bill together with Inuit, Métis, and First Nations. Like, they were an integral part of coming up with that piece of legislation. And I think the same, and I did that in my previous life as an activist. I think I'm still an activist, but I guess I have a different day job. I did that with the Quebec government on a new sustainable transport policy. And I think the department and people in the department have a tremendous amount of knowledge, but we don't know everything. And by doing it with you, it just means that it's so much more adapted and appropriate to your reality and to your needs. So there's no way we're doing this on our own. And then you will be part of this. In terms of consulting Canadians, to be totally honest with you, this is not something I had thought about a lot. I think I'm going to rely on your knowledge of your public to do that. I mean, maybe there's a way we can do some kind of targeted consultation. I mean, as I said, I am worried that time is not on our side, and I would be reluctant to engage in very long consultations with Canadians, not because it's not important, but just because should we do that, we may not be able to get this policy through, and that would be a shame if we couldn't. So I think I'm going to. I mean, if you have ideas on how we could do this in a very targeted and nimble and time-constrained way, I'm certainly open. But I think I'm going to rely a lot on your knowledge of your public to do that.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you, Mr. Minister. Is there anyone else who would like to add a point or two to this discussion of the National Museum policy? No? Okay. Well, do allow me then to say how grateful we are, Stephen, for your careful answers, for hearing us, and for, I think, understanding that museums are in a particularly difficult position. Not that the entire society is not, but I think that we really are. And it is important that we continue for all the Canadians to do our work, to contribute to our society in the ways only museums know how to and can do. And in that sense, I really echo Anita's words. I also want to say that we've heard some really encouraging and broad ideas, and I want to thank you for that. We heard about the flexibility with regard to Young Canada Work Program. We heard, of course, about the relief measures that have been introduced and that will be coming, very important. We heard about Museum Assistance Program. We heard about long-term funding for us, which is a sector that is particularly handicapped in that sense. And we heard about the access to digital world and the importance of it, which indeed it is. And of course, we heard about National Museum policy, and that gives us all hope that we will have at least a framework, a broad framework developed while you are still mandated for that work, because we greatly appreciate working with you, and we greatly appreciate the help that we get from your office, as well from our colleagues from the Canadian Heritage Department, who we know are very busy and answering million questions, and please transmit our thanks to them. But just as we part, I want to suggest one thing. You know, you have seen who we are now. You know us. You see how open and constructive we are. It would really be great to continue this debate while you have a few more minutes and we have some more minutes. And between many Zoom meetings, we can organize one more. So do consider that we can start on things in the way that maybe, you know, regular departmental procedures don't allow, but we're small, we're nimble, we're creative, and we're proactive. We're sort of like activists. So please consider that. In any case, thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your department and the Department of Canadian Heritage. And we really look forward to working with you in the future. I also want to thank my colleagues who have contributed not just to this discussion, but contributed to our hard work. The solidarity, the collaboration, and partnership we established are really, I think, a model for us to follow in the future. So thank you, my colleagues, and thank you again, Mr. Minister. I just want to remind the audience that we will take a short break, and then we will continue to discuss other similar issues, but with our other sister institutions, with the Alliance of Natural History Museums of Canada, Canadian Association of Zoos and Aquaria, the Canadian Association of Science Centres, and the National Trust. So thank you very much all, and please stay in touch and please continue to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanda. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you. Welcome to the panel discussion that CMA is holding with extended family. We have today leaders of several other associations joining us in this important cross-Canada live session. We have with us Natalie Wolf from the National Trust of Canada, Elizabeth McRae from the Alliance of Natural History Museums. We have Marianne Meter from the Canadian Association of Science Centres, Jim Fassett from the Canada's Accredited Zoos and Aquaria, Dolph Dion, the CEO of the Toronto Zoo, and Tracy Calajeros from the Exploration Place. But more than that, others who could not participate at this time will be in the future part of this group, such as our colleagues at the Botanical Council and many botanical garden specialists. So we are grateful to all of you for dedicating your time to us today. We have heard the Honourable Stephen Guilbeault tells us in a dialogue with the provincial and territorial museums about the measures that the government is taking to help our sector and his plans for the future. The minister addressed some of the key issues, not just the measures that they have introduced and they will be introducing, also mentioned the Young Canada Work Program and the flexibility of Museum Assistance Program. He mentioned the importance of the digitization efforts. And he also answered a few questions about national museum policy and his desire to develop a framework for all museums and heritage institutions, related heritage institutions, during his mandate. He also talked about the importance of course, climate change and our advocacy in those areas. So it is a very fruitful and important discussion. We felt the minister was very open and heard us. And so it will be very important for us now to discuss a little more in detail broader implications of this. Because we see at the CMA ourselves as a node in a network of institutions. We discussed that before. And as such, the need to work in solidarity, in connectedness, in being together with regard to social responsibility of our kinds of institutions. So thank you all for coming to this roundtable, and thank you for joining me. What we thought that we will do today is we have some 30 minutes for our discussion, and that we will focus on three broad themes. Topic one is financial crisis and relief efforts, and that will be led by Jim Fassett, with all the others, of course, chiming in. The topic two would be importance of digitization for our sector, because for our broader community, that is particularly important. And Marianne Meter will be leading that. And we then have the future of our sector, and Tracy will start the discussion on that, and everybody else will join. Elizabeth, of course, Marianne, Natalie, etc., etc. So I am starting my stopwatch. Jim, mic to you.
Thank you, Vanda. Merci. Je vais juste commencer avec quelques mots au ministre. Juste pour dire au ministre, je vous souhaite la bienvenue et vous remercier de prendre le temps de vous rejoindre, nous, aujourd'hui. Nous vivons tous des moments très inhabituels, à la fois sur une base personnelle et dans nos milieux de travail. Il est certain que nous nous attendons tous à vivre des changements importants, mais personne ne sait à quoi ressemblant ces changements et quand ils se produiront. Il n'existe aucune manuelle économie et de notre société mondiale sur laquelle nous baser. Nous devons donc compter de nos meilleures intentions, notre vision et notre souci de bien-être commun pour s'entendre. Ceci n'est nullement différent pour nos membres. Ensemble, nos institutions représentent une belle partie de la mosaïque canadienne qui offre des activités de conservation, d'éducation, de culture et d'une vision générale de la grandeur du paysage canadien. Mais, en même temps, vous tous, comme des membres d'ASAC, avez une entreprise ingénieure. Chacun d'entre vous avez les mêmes pressions qu'important quelle autre entreprise. Les taxes, l'éclairage, le chauffage, l'électricité et les charges salariales doivent être respectés. Pour mon part, je vous représente les zoos et aquariums et crédits du Canada. Vous qui assumez une responsabilité supplémentaire liée aux soins aux animaux qui, comme vous le savez, est un service essentiel. Votre principale source de revenus, que sont les visiteurs de la programmation, ont été interrompus du jour au lendemain. Et dans un nombre de cas, même l'ouverture saisonnière sera retardée. Les centres des sciences perdront 3 millions de dollars par semaine. Les zoos aquariums accrédités du Canada accueilleront cette année certaines beaucoup moins que le moyen annuel de 12 millions de visiteurs. Et les visites des musées sont inexactes. The cultural segment of Canada is a $54 billion industry. We are a significant part of the tourism sector. Relief to our respective groups of members can be unique. Taking on debt can be a challenging measure. We are mostly, but not all, eligible for the programs announced to date, be it laid-off employees using the CERB, other costs deferred by federal or provincial governments, or business loans. Each will help. However, it will not always cover basic expenses. And if a member's institution has any corporate ties to a municipal government, the current rules rendered as such, in our case anyway, the zoos and aquariums, are ineligible. All our respective members need to be eligible. Finally, and we'll get into more of this a little bit later, the recovery strategy. Our group of members represent an area of the economy and society perhaps best positioned to lead. Whether it is through enhanced use of technology, the physical spaces we occupy, the visitors have a special link to the zoo, aquarium, science center, and museums across Canada. No one person, no one group, and no one department can be expected to have all the answers. Before you today are organizations whose memberships constitute a significant part, both economically and culturally, to the Canadian mosaic. As the government's recovery plan evolves, we look forward to our active participation in its development and rollout. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jim. Excellent summary. And a great introduction to this discussion. I'm now going to ask other members who may want to add something to Jim's words. Natalie?
It's Natalie Bull here from the National Trust. Thank you so much for creating this opportunity, and merci beaucoup, Jim, for a great introduction to the issues. Just sort of bringing some additional challenges I think that we're facing. I think the fallout of this pandemic is exacerbating and deepening existing financial challenges and challenges for historic places in our sector. And so we're particularly concerned with historic places of faith that are heritage landmarks in every community across the country. They are heritage landmarks, but they also serve a real social safety net purpose. And we know that many of them were already struggling with closures So there are congregations across the country wondering how they're going to keep those buildings open and what their future will be. Also thinking about legacy businesses, so Main Street businesses in heritage buildings in our traditional downtowns, struggling with closures and the challenges for investment in their buildings and their infrastructure over time is something that we're also conscious of. And so many heritage sites and heritage organizations that rely heavily on volunteers and won't be able to take advantage of wage subsidies and loans and other measures. So there is it is a complex challenge that needs to be addressed. And we know that our colleagues at the U.S. National Trust are starting to advocate for the conversion of existing grant programs for capital or for program work that, the potential for that funding to be converted into funding that's available for urgent operational needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Important points to remember. Anybody else would like to add something? No? All right. Now, I would like us to turn our attention to the importance of digitization for our sector and the request for funding for these initiatives. I'm asking Dr. Marion Meter to start the discussion. Marion.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. And again, thanks for this opportunity. As Natalie said, I think it's a unique time for this conversation to be happening and incredibly important. In terms of digital engagement, and I think maybe that's where we can start this conversation, I kind of wanted to ground that in a bit of background about our respective networks and the organizations we represent. And so this is across, themes of nature, environment, science, arts, culture. The organizations we represent are among the most trusted institutions in this country. And we've seen that time and time again in public trust surveys, certainly for where does the public seek accurate science information. Science museums and science centers are ranked number one alongside universities. And of course, they create information that's relevant to the public, that's digestible. So that's an important element to consider when we're talking about this movement into digital engagement. So in person, our respective networks reach a vast majority of Canadians. So our network alone, again, we're one single node, part of this countrywide fabric. There's probably a reach of about 8 million people in person per year. That, of course, these conversations, this engagement is moving online. So just among our network, which is a node, the reach is probably about 1.5 million people through social media. That was 3 weeks ago. Okay, that number is increasing. If we're adding all of us together, this is significant. So the public trust and our reach online is significant. In terms of what we're seeing is happening, the impact, we're seeing three main kind of categories of digital engagement impact. I would say the first is really helping Canada in this time of crisis in planking the curve. This is a public health crisis, and we're playing a role in sharing that accurate scientific information, sharing the accurate information from the public health authorities with our audiences. So even at a time, like Jim mentioned, of economic crisis for these institutions, many of which have already suffered layoffs to staff, they're still prioritizing communicating to their audiences. And that health authority piece of it and that digital engagement is one part of it. So planking the curve, that's a real impact that our respective networks are having now. I would say supporting the formal education system. And so I think a lot of people may not realize the role our organizations play in partnership often with school boards and even directly with ministries of education. So again, across our network, 90% of members run school visits. They work hand in hand with schools. So there's an expertise there in supporting this K through 12 network of education. And so one way we're seeing the digital engagement piece is directly supporting teachers, parents, and youth in that effort. So this could be simply sharing materials that our organizations already have, maybe it's activities, sharing that online, to direct engagement through, we're seeing a lot of now live video engagement for direct access to experts on topics. So those are just a few quick ways that supportive formal education is happening. And we're seeing our networks and our associations at the table in terms of what does the future of education look like, certainly in the short term, the midterm, and it's exciting when we get into the conversation around what the long term in the future looks like. I would say a third way this digital engagement piece is happening is our organizations, our networks represent organizations that are mission driven, okay? Mission driven in terms of engaging with science, art, culture, history, heritage. And that mission is transitioning to being online and engaging the whole family. And again, there are research studies that show when you engage the whole family, it increases the interest of youth in that family in topics. And we see this in science, and it's one of the critical factors in trying to improve numbers in youth being interested in science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM as the common acronym that a lot of people like to use. So engaging the whole families in this time when parents are at home supporting their kids in their learning journey, this is a hard transition for many people across the country. And having that fun, curiosity-driven engagement is powerful. And again, this can look like virtual tours of museums or our parks. It can look like concerts, engaging through the arts. It can look like science experiments. On our website, we've kind of have a page where people can kind of see collectively what's happening across the country if a parent or teacher wants to tune in. I've seen that for Parks Canada as well. I've seen that across that. There's this tremendous resource of engagement that's happening. I just want to kind of close off on the engagement piece by just grounding it in the reality that, again, our organizations are doing this at a time when they're strapped for funds and often for people. They've lost people in layoffs, and they're still prioritizing their missions in this work. It is unsustainable. And so I think when we get to a place where we can talk about solutions going forward, I think having whatever it looks like, a fund, an emergency fund that supports this digital engagement work will be critical, because as we move forward to the future, we're going to need it. Canada's going to need this resource in engaging the public. So I think I'll leave it there in terms of the digital engagement piece. I think there's an angle that maybe someone else can chime in on around certainly collections and that movement of digitization of collections, and that would be really interesting to explore as well.
Thank you. Excellent. I thought perhaps, Dolph, you'd like to continue, and maybe Liz, you also want to talk about collections. Let's see. Dolph, your turn.
Thank you so much. And Marianne really hit it on the head when she talked about connection with our community and trust. As a community of experts in a wide range of fields, we have a unique voice and a really important voice as far as the fabric of our communities. And as far as the zoo and our Toronto Zoo is concerned, we see this as an important time to be a source of good news stories when we're dealing with so many significant issues and helping people get through the challenges of their day-to-day life by sometimes just being a bit of a positive distraction and a learning opportunity. We're making a lot of use of the term closed but still caring. And whether you're with living animals like we are, or collections of non-living things, that notion of how we care and our passion, it's very important. It comes through right now as people seek a bit of a refuge in these tough times. What we've seen as far as digital outreach is incredible growth over the past month. And it's something we've been working on really intently for literally years. But in the past month, over 13 million digital impressions. That dwarfs the number of people. That's 10 times the number of people who would come in through our doors in a given year. So when we really take that step back and go, what does living our mission and sharing it with our community really look like? We ask the questions of what having an impact as far as achieving our mission, what that looks like. These digital tools and this crisis has forced us to really reconcile that core question of who we are and what we're trying to do. And in our case, protect people, animals, and conservation science to fight extinction. So we're using this moment to help our hidden zoo go extinct, to show people the stories they've wondered about, and help them become part of our zoo in this time. So, how we continue to evolve as a sector and work in partnership with the government to change how people engage, to expand how we use technology and doing that more effectively, to build natural and cultural history knowledge, to really expand scientific literacy. If there's ever been a time where we need a country full of critical thinkers, it's now. Folks deferring to the experts, folks living the direction, planking the curve, staying home. And at the same time, I don't think there's ever been a time where our connection to nature has become more prominent. You see the number of people who are inside, their desire to get out into parks. That's real. That's part of who we are. And we're looking forward to the flip side of that. How do we take what we've learned through this pandemic, connect people to nature through our screens, and ultimately bridge them to getting outside and it be a bigger part of their lifestyle as they live in it? They often take it for granted, but then they get out into our sites across the sector and get to dive a little deeper with our human or natural history connections to those spaces.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dolph.
Vanda, may I expand a little bit on what?
Please do. Please do.
Just yesterday, we at the association received an inquiry from the Toronto School Board asking us if we had members who would like to participate in a series of organized virtual tours. So we've actually put that request out to our members Canada-wide. We have members who have zoos and aquariums that are very unique. Each one's a little bit different, even though they do share practices and all the rest of it. So we're already seeing it on the ground, as Dolph has outlined in some detail. But as an association, we're just getting the request now to see if there's more that we can bring in our membership into the educational background at the elementary school level, at least at the moment, because they're the only ones that are doing anything. The higher levels of education are not, obviously, but we're getting it frontline and center just as recent as yesterday.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Let's now turn to the theme of the future, near and a little more distant, where I think many of these topics will sort of feed into it. If it's okay by you, I'd like to ask Tracy to start the discussion. Tracy.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and reactions as we're all working our way through what is obviously a crisis. But in every crisis, there are also opportunities. And I do believe that our entire sector has an opportunity here as people are turning back to science. Dolph talked about the reliance on the experts, and that's absolutely true. And when you look at what we've come out of in the last several years and this disintegration of the public trust, both in institutions, individuals, you're talking politics or universities for that matter, or media, what we're seeing now is folks are going back to what's important to them. And key to just about every community in Canada, there is a museum or a science center or a zoo or an aquarium or an art gallery. We exist in the middle of Canadians' lives because we have, as an industry, in all corners of our sector, developed products that are a reflection of the communities that we have developed them in. That public trust that we are all relying on so heavily now to keep ourselves safe, to keep our kids and our parents safe, that public trust is core to what all of our organizations do. And as I listen to my colleagues from across the country, I'm actually filled with hope because I really do believe that we have an industry that's strong at its core and whose primary focus is on improving life for Canadians. And Canadians en masse are inviting us into their homes in numbers that we have never seen before via these various digital platforms. So I really do believe that as we move into this future that we can't entirely define yet, our centers are going to play a key role in that, whether it's sharing vital information, whether it's finding ways to share our stories even when we can't be together. It's that opportunity to reach Canadians at a level that they can relate to. We all talk about looking past in order to be able to predict the future. And museums have done that for a very long time. My own institution has a foot in two worlds. We are a science center, we are also a museum, and I have always felt that that combination has strengthened our offerings in all areas. And I have evidence to back that up. So I think that this collaboration that is evidenced by the group of us on this panel today and Canadians from our profession right across the country tuning in is that we all see the value in what we bring to the table. And Canadians are adopting that value en masse, whether they're watching Dolph's giraffes or they're learning how to make elephant toothpaste. They are engaging in product that we can share. And as Marianne has pointed out, we're doing that for free as it stands right now. My sense is that Canadians will continue to come back to us looking for that information going forward, and it's up to us to find a way to be able to sustain the offerings that we're giving to Canadians right now. The data-driven scientific solutions that Canada has mounted during COVID-19 have proven to be reliable, and we stand up well when we're comparing our approach to those of other natures. And what lessons have we learned from this approach that we can now apply to future issues that we have to deal with, or contemporary ones that we've all been battling, things like climate change? I really believe that we are truly stronger together, and our entire industry and sector represents a diversity that really isn't captured in very many other sectors. And we have relationships with government, we have relationships with industry and with individual Canadians in a way that everyone can rely on to be truthful, trustworthy, and something that is moving us forward with an eye to what's going to work best for Canadians. So I realize we're all feeling pretty spooked about what the future might look like right now, but I think that we have done nothing but strengthen our country to date, and we are going to continue to do exactly that going forward. Canadians are counting on us to do it, and it is a big part of our duty to all of our members and visitors. Thanks.
I'd like to just chime in, if I may. Thank you, Tracy. I share your optimism, and I think, as Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. I've had more conversations with other national organizations in our expanded sector over the last couple of weeks than I've had in quite a long time, and this panel is a great example of that. And I think we really need to take advantage of this opportunity to stay connected and to keep talking to each other, to address that long-standing fragmentation of the heritage sector, whether it's history and heritage organizations or museums or tourist destinations, the heritage professions and the trades, arts and culture, archives, libraries. We're all playing a role in telling the story of Canada, and we're stronger together than we are apart. And this may be our moment. And I just wanted to share, I love looking at parallel universes, and I look with envy at the environmental movement and how well connected the major organizations are. I think there are 19 national environmental organizations that all work together under the banner of the Green Budget Coalition and collaborate to identify what the key asks are for the sector and put their collective voices behind those messages. So in one particular year, the focus may be on certain aspects of the environmental movement, but they share the focus, and collectively, I think, have made some really important gains for the sector. So I would put that forward as a model that all of us could emulate. And I think on that note, I would just a comment about recovery strategies and the stimulus investments that we know are coming. I think collectively we have the opportunity to influence what those look like. And so it's easy to invest in construction and infrastructure, but we're the cultural infrastructure. So let's work together to give government lots of great opportunities to invest in stimulus measures that will create new green jobs and strengthen the Canadian identity, that develop the potential of the tourism industry and of these places and stories and organizations that are so fundamental to the culture of our country. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're bang on there. our role as organizations that have far more in common than sets us apart, and places that bring communities together, and using this as a time to say, well, we can't be together in person, we can be together digitally. I think that's incredibly powerful. And also taking that time and reflecting to make sure that our organizations are really reflecting the needs and interests of our community, how they look as far as the demographics, how they're thinking, their values surrounding. We've talked about climate change, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, our relationship with nature and the wildlife trade, really the origins of this pandemic, to be safe places for those discussions, to challenge past practices, and really start looking at what viability in a post-COVID-19 world looks like, building that cultural framework, that cultural infrastructure into our thinking. That's both the human side of it as well as those physical objects and animals. And my fear, as we come through this, I share your optimism. I'll speak to that. But my fear in the meantime is things like orphaned collections. What are those precious things that might get squeezed or left behind right now? And how do we make sure they find a safe place to land? How do we create that safe environment for our guests to come back to? Because I think once people refine their perspectives, they're going to see how important our organizations are. They're going to want to be part of it. We've seen other organizations in the sector redefine themselves. I think of libraries who have moved from the traditional paper book to those great resources in books, as well as the digital piece. And we're looking forward to getting our guests back and living our mission more than ever, as we've gone from some historic transactions to deeper relationships through this crisis.
Thank you. Liz, would you like to add your opinion to this?
Well, I was going to present on digital, and I thought I would add some comments that I've prepared for that section. Just a little background on the Alliance. We were formed in 2002 in order to collaborate on initiatives that strengthen and build capacity for natural history museums in Canada. And collectively, the museums are the stewards of millions of natural history specimens and are dedicated to the preservation and interpretation of Canada's natural history on behalf of all Canadians. And every year we welcome millions of visitors and school children, such as my partners here in this panel do. And we're important repositories for collections and knowledge centers and the network has initiated and supported projects in the areas of scientific research, collections development, exhibitions, educational programming, and we hope that what we do can provide solutions to lessen the impacts that are being felt during these trying times. What we do know from our work and from those of other partners is that some of our natural world is disappearing and changing significantly and at times rapidly. A shortage of natural resources and global warming are just some of the effects that we're experiencing. And we are, in fact, according to some, facing a planetary emergency. So the work that collections-based museum researchers and staff do in natural history museums help us to understand the biodiversity and give us clues on how we might preserve nature for future generations. So it's important as we experience these challenging times that we don't lose this expertise. For this work, there's no more important time than right now to capture this important and ever-changing information. So these natural history museum collections in Canada help scientists understand how species have changed over time, and they can possibly help us to understand how we might adapt to climate change. So recording the state of nature is, in fact, the first step in conservation. So input from museum staff to global online databases from museum scientists all over the world have paved the way for important assessments on global diversity. So what researchers contribute can be used as evidence for intergovernmental negotiations and inform biodiversity targets. Studying the past, in fact, helps predict and protect the future. So we must continue to understand our natural world for the sake of our future, and museums play a critical role in helping to achieve this. So we hope that this much needed work will continue and that expertise in these areas is not lost. Let's not lose sight of these important findings and continue to build towards evidence-based solutions as we conserve and protect the planet even now as we face so many other challenges. In closing, it's our hope that museums will become solutions and part of the pressing need of Canadians, be it in the areas of education, entertainment, youth employment, or just comfort during these anxious times. That's me.
Thank you very much, Liz. Would anybody like to add anything else to this discussion? We are coming to 30 minutes, but we can maybe squeeze something else in if anybody wishes to add.
If I were to add anything, and I don't want to be a wet blanket, but I don't think we can ignore the economic reality of our institutions going forward in the short term. We have amongst our membership already, I have an executive committee that is already talking about what if are worst case scenarios. We have some institutions that the burn rate per month is astounding. These are both large and small. We're already addressing, and I think Dolph alluded to it, in the worst case scenario, I'm already getting overtures about what happens if certain animals cannot be cared for in their current environment, whether they're members of ours or not. These are very real situations in the next number of months that we expect we're going to have to face. And there is no one solution. We're having to work together as an organization to come up with solutions. I'm going to be working on that starting tomorrow here. But the financial availability of our various members is very real, because in order to be there to be solution providers, it's really important that government, the federal government, provincial governments, and anybody else understand that regardless of how we're structured, regardless of our connections to any level of government, be it municipal or otherwise, that in the same way that small and medium-sized enterprises that are members of the CFIB need copious amounts of help, so does our members of our organizations need likewise. So it's not to be a wet blanket, but I think in the short term, there's some very real economic issues, viability issues that will need to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you all. Indeed, we brought to you some of our concerns, and rather urgent concerns and challenges with regard to the financial and crisis that we are facing. But we also talked about going into the future, how to evolve our sector, and our sector that has a unique voice. And we also talked about our social role and our connectedness to other sectors, the importance of us as players in a broader universe and of economy, education, social welfare, et cetera, et cetera. So I really want to thank you for bringing these topics to the attention of across the Canada, not just our sector, but all the Canadians, and certainly to the Ministry of Heritage as well. I hope many related ministries are watching us today. I also want to thank you personally for demonstrating the interconnectedness of our world and how important the solidarity, collaboration, and concern for social issues is to us. And I look forward to working with all of you in the future. We have an important task to complete right after this meeting. We need to put our minds together to send an important message to the Canadians and to the Ministry. So thank you again very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. This ends the public portion of our virtual conference. I hope that you have found it engaging, that it has brought to you new insights. I would like to ask you that if you have thoughts and ideas, to please mail them to us, email them to us at info@museum.ca. And of course, you should be expecting many more offerings from the CMA, but also from our broader family in the future, these things online. Now, of course, if you're a member of the CMA, there is time for a break, and then our annual general meeting will be starting shortly. You will have received an email from us with the necessary details on how to connect to that session. With all this, once again, I'm Vanda Vitali, the Executive Director of the Canadian Museum Association, thanking you all for having participated in this roundtable and for making our case stronger and more powerful. Thank you very much.